He said I was nothing. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he was discussing the weather. I sat there frozen in place, the room spinning around me like a carousel I couldn't get off. The words settled on my skin like ice, and for a moment I thought I might shatter. I had spent years building my life around him, years of believing that if I was just good enough, just quiet enough, he would see me. I had given him every piece of my heart, one small, trembling piece at a time, hoping that if I offered enough, he would finally love me the way I loved him. But now, in the soft hush of his final words, I saw the truth. He had never loved me at all. The tears came hot and fast, slipping down my cheeks in silent rivers. I tried to hold them back, tried to swallow them the way I had swallowed every small hurt, every quiet insult. But they wouldn't stop. They fell warm and unbidden, and with each one, I felt the last pieces of my hope wash away. He watched me without expression, his eyes as cold as the winter rain. "I'm tired of your drama," he said, his voice low. "Tired of your tears." He turned away, then dismissing me, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. And maybe to him I was. I sat there for a long time, after he left my hands trembling in my lap. The room was silent except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall, each second, a small hammer against my ribs. I tried to breathe, tried to find the air beneath the weight of his words, but it felt like I was drowning in the quiet. Eventually, I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I made my way to the bathroom, the cold tiles biting at my bare feet. I looked at myself in the mirror, at the red-rimmed eyes and the tear-streaked cheeks. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked broken small, like a ghost of the person she used to be. But then I looked closer. Past the tears, past the hurt, I saw a flicker of something else, a small quiet spark that refused to die. It wasn't strength, not yet. But it was the beginning of something, and I held on to it like a lifeline. I washed my face, the water cold against my skin. Each splash felt like a small act of defiance, a quiet promise that I wasn't going to let him decide who I was. Not anymore. I dried my face, my movements slow and deliberate, and when I looked in the mirror again, I saw the ghost of a smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I walked back into the bedroom, the silence pressing down around me. The bed was still unmade, the sheets tangled from a restless night. I sat down on the edge, my hands folded in my lap, and let the quiet settle. I let myself feel the hurt, let it sink deep into my bones, because I knew that pretending it didn't matter wouldn't make it go away. He had made me cry, but in those tears I found something he could never touch. My pain, my truth, my resolve. I didn't know yet how I would make him pay, but I knew that I would. Because he had taught me that love was not a shield, it was a weapon, and I was done using it against myself. I thought about all the times I had apologized when he was the one who was cruel. All the times I had made myself smaller to fit into the tiny space he left for me. I thought about the nights I had lain awake wondering what I had done wrong when the only thing I had done was trust the wrong person. And I felt something in me shift. I stood up the decision, quiet but firm. I wouldn't beg for his love anymore. I wouldn't waste another tear on a man who saw them as weakness. He thought he had broken me, but he didn't understand that breaking was just another way of remaking, and I was ready to rebuild. I walked to the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and let the cold seep into my skin, let it steady the trembling in my hands. I whispered to the darkness, to the silent night that wrapped around me like a cloak, "You will not break me again." The words were soft, but they were real. They were mine. And in that quiet promise, I felt the first true breath of freedom. Because he had made me cry, but he had also made me see. See that I didn't need him. See that my worth was never something he could take away. And see that the tears he thought were my weakness were the beginning of my strength. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was too full, my heart too raw. But I lay there in the dark, my eyes open to the ceiling, and I let the quiet wrap around me like armor. Because I knew that tomorrow would come, and with it, the first step on the road to making him pay. I didn't know yet how I would do it. I didn't know what form it would take. But I knew that it would be mine, my plan, my choice, my power. As the night stretched on, I let the tears dry on my skin, let them become part of the person I was becoming. And in that quiet, I felt the last of my fear slip away. He had made me cry, but I would make him pay. The morning light crept into my room with a softness that belied the storm inside me. I lay still for a long time, the sheets tangled around my legs, my heart steady in my chest. There were no more tears left to shed. In their place was something new, something solid and unyielding. I rose slowly, my feet cold on the wooden floor, and walked to the window. The city was waking up, the streets below, coming alive with the quiet hum of people moving through their lives. I watched them for a moment, each one wrapped in their own stories, their own battles. And I wondered if any of them had ever felt what I felt now, the calm that comes after the storm, the quiet that settles in your bones when you decide you will no longer be a victim. I moved through my morning with deliberate care, each action a small ritual of reclamation. I brewed my coffee, the rich, dark scent filling the kitchen like a promise. I dressed in clothes that made me feel strong, that fit my skin like armor. I brushed my hair back from my face, my reflection in the mirror, calm and composed. There was no trace of the woman who had cried herself to sleep. She was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as soft as a breath, as steady as a heartbeat. At work, I carried that calm with me, like a shield. He was there, of course, moving through the office with the same easy confidence he had always worn. He didn't look at me, not directly, but I felt the weight of his gaze when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I didn't give him the satisfaction of flinching. I kept my head high, my voice steady, and I watched him as carefully as he watched me. People noticed the change. They didn't say anything, not directly, but I saw it in the way they paused when I spoke, in the small nods of agreement that followed my words. For so long, I had been invisible, my quiet swallowed up by the noise of everyone else. But now, in the space I had claimed for myself, I found that people were listening. And that was enough. He tried to test me, of course. A cutting remark here, a small slight there, each one meant to remind me of my place. But I didn't react. I let his words wash over me, like water, let them slide off the quiet resolve that had taken root in my chest. Because I knew now that he only had the power I gave him, and I wasn't giving him any more. At home, I found peace in the small rituals of my life. Cooking dinner for myself, the soft hiss of onions in the pan, like a song. Curling up with a book, the weight of the words grounding me in a way his voice never had. I let the quiet be my companion, let it remind me that I didn't need anyone else to make me whole. Some nights I lay awake and thought about what he had done, about the way he had made me feel so small, so unworthy. But those thoughts didn't have the same power they once did. They were like echoes now, fading into the distance as I built something stronger in their place. I started writing again. Nothing big, just small thoughts, half-formed ideas that had been buried under his words for too long. I let the pen move across the page without censoring, without worrying about whether the words were good enough, because they were mine, and that was enough. One night, as I wrote in my journal, I paused and let the pen rest against the paper. I thought about the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. I thought about how easy it would be to let him win, to let his voice drown out my own. But I was done with easy. I was done with quiet that meant surrender. I wrote it down, the words slow and deliberate. I will not let him decide who I am. And as I wrote it, I felt the truth of it settle into me like a promise. He had made me cry, but I had learned something in those tears. I had learned that I was stronger than he would ever understand. And I had learned that strength isn't always about fighting back with fists and fury. Sometimes it's about standing still, about holding your ground when the world tries to push you down. He didn't see the change. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to believe it. He kept playing his games, kept trying to pull me back into the shadows he had built around us. But I had found the light, and I wasn't going back. One morning, as I walked into the office, he looked at me and said, "You think you're better than me now?" His voice was low, a challenge wrapped in a smile. I met his gaze steadily, my own smile, quiet and sure. "I don't have to think," I said softly. "I know." For a moment, he just stared at me, and in that silence, I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was small, but it was enough, because I knew then that he was starting to see what I had always known, that I wasn't the woman he thought he could break. I was something stronger, something he couldn't touch. That night, I wrote in my journal the words, "a quiet anthem." He thought he could silence me, but my silence is not surrender. My silence is the sound of me reclaiming my power, because he had made me cry. But I was done crying, and soon he would see just what that meant. The days moved on one after another, and with each sunrise, I felt my resolve grow a little stronger. There was no grand declaration, no sudden moment of transformation, just the slow, steady building of something unbreakable inside me. It was like watching a seed push through the soil, quiet and unseen at first, but relentless in its growth. At work, I kept my head down, but my eyes were open. I watched everything, every small exchange, every flicker of doubt or insecurity in his eyes. He thought I was still the same woman who had let his words shape her world. But I was different now. I was no longer willing to let him write the story of who I was. I saw the way he moved through the office, his easy charm, the careful way he played to the people around him. I watched the way he smiled at them, the way he laughed, and I realized how much of it was an act. Because underneath that smooth surface, there was a small nervous energy that hadn't been there before. He was starting to see the cracks, and I was starting to see the opportunity. At home, I built small rituals of strength. Each morning, I woke early and went for a run, the cold air biting at my skin, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement, a steady drumbeat in my chest. I let the quiet of the early hour settle into my bones, let it remind me that I didn't need anyone's permission to move forward. I filled my evenings with things that fed me, books, that made me think, music, that stirred something deep inside me. I let my world expand beyond the narrow confines he had tried to keep me in. I started reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with the parts of myself I had put away to make room for him. And in those small, gentle steps, I felt the weight of him slip from my shoulders. He noticed, of course. He was too perceptive not to. At first, he tried to ignore it, to pretend that the woman he had always known was still there waiting to be put back in her place. But I could see the way his eyes followed me now, the small, uncertain flickers that betrayed his confidence. He was starting to understand that I was no longer playing his game. One afternoon, he caught me in the break room, his voice low and smooth. "You've been busy lately," he said, his smile easy, but his eyes searching. "Anything you want to share?" I met his gaze calmly, my own smile, quiet and sure. "Just focusing on what matters," I said softly. And in that simple answer, I saw the first flash of uncertainty in his eyes. Because what mattered wasn't him. It never had been. I started to find small ways to reclaim the spaces he had tried to control. I spoke up more in meetings, my voice calm and deliberate. I offered ideas and watched them take root, each one a quiet testament to the strength he had tried to bury. I didn't raise my voice or force my opinions. I simply spoke the truth. And in that truth, I found a power he couldn't touch. At home, I let the quiet become my sanctuary. I cooked meals that nourished me, sat in the soft glow of lamplight, and let the stillness soothe the places that had been raw for too long. I wrote in my journal every night, the words flowing from me like water. Each line was a promise: I will not be small. I will not be silenced. I will not let him decide who I am. The more I claimed those small victories, the more I saw the fear in his eyes. It was never loud, never obvious, just a small flicker in the way he looked at me, a faint tightness in his smile. But it was enough, because I knew then that he was starting to understand what I had always known, that the quietest strength is the most dangerous of all. One evening, as I sat by the window, the city lights flickering below, I let myself imagine the future. Not the one he had tried to build for me, but the one I would build for myself. I saw a life filled with the things that mattered: work that challenged me, friendships that lifted me, a home that felt like my own. I saw a life where I was no longer defined by the man who had tried to break me. I wrote it down in my journal, the words soft and certain. I am not his to define. I am mine. And as I set down my pen, I felt the quiet certainty of that truth settle into me like a heartbeat. Because he had made me cry, but he had also taught me something he never intended, that the power he thought he held over me was always an illusion. And now that I had seen through it, there was no going back. The next morning, I woke with that quiet strength, still in my chest, steady and sure. I moved through the world with calm purpose, each small step a quiet declaration that I would not be silenced again. Because he had made me cry. But he had also made me see that my tears were never the end. They were the beginning of something stronger than he could ever understand. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in small moments, quiet, and almost invisible, like the first cracks in the ice of a frozen lake. But I saw them. I felt them. And in each small fracture, I found the space to breathe. It started with a look. Just a glance, really, but it told me more than his words ever had. We were in a meeting surrounded by polite voices and practiced smiles, and he was speaking with that easy confidence he wore like a suit. But when his eyes met mine, there was a flicker. There's something sharp and uncertain, a brief flash of fear he tried to hide. I didn't smile. I didn't let him see the quiet thrill that raced through me. I just held his gaze calm and steady until he looked away. And in that small victory, I realized something he was afraid of me. Not because of anything I had done, but because I had stopped letting him decide who I was. It was a power I had never felt before. A quiet power soft as a breath, but strong enough to shake the foundations of the world he had built around me. He thought he knew me, thought he knew how to bend me to his will, but he didn't see the way I had grown in the silence of my own thoughts, the way my strength had taken root in the quiet spaces he had always overlooked. I started to see his weaknesses in the same way I had once seen my own. The small cracks in his calm, the way his laughter didn't quite reach his eyes when he felt challenged. I saw how much he needed people to believe in his version of the truth, how he built his power on the silence of others. And I understood then that his greatest fear wasn't me, it was losing control. At home, I wrote it down in my journal, the words, a quiet promise to myself, he doesn't control me. He never did. And in the soft scratch of the pen on the paper, I felt the shift settle into my bones. I didn't rush. I didn't confront him. I let the quiet become my weapon, the gentle steadiness of my presence, a reminder that I wasn't playing his game anymore. He tried to draw me back in with his small provocations, a careless word here, a gentle insult there. But I didn't bite. I let him see that I was done dancing to his tune. People around us started to notice. They didn't say anything, but I saw it in their eyes. The way they looked at me when I spoke, the way they paused to listen. I wasn't the woman they had known before, the one who stayed small to keep the peace. I had found my voice in the quiet, and they were starting to hear it. One afternoon, he tried to corner me in the break room. His voice was low, his smile easy, but I saw the tension in the line of his shoulders. "You've been different lately," he said, his tone almost casual. "Is there something I should know about?" I met his gaze calmly, my own smile soft and sure. "Nothing you need to worry about," I said quietly. And in that simple answer, I watched his eyes darken, the mask slipping for just a moment. Because he knew in that instant that he no longer had a hold on me. That night, I lay in bed and thought about all the times I had let his words define my worth. All the times I had given him the power to decide who I was allowed to be. And I realized that in every one of those moments, I had been giving him a gift he didn't deserve. My silence, my fear, my willingness to believe that I was less than I was. I wrote it down in my journal, the words, slow and deliberate. I am not his to define. I am mine. And as I set down the pen, I felt the quiet strength of that truth settle around me like armor. The next morning, I woke with a calm that felt unbreakable. I moved through the world with quiet purpose, each small step a reminder that I wasn't living in his shadow anymore. He tried to provoke me, tried to find the cracks in the calm I wore like a shield. But he didn't understand that the woman he had tried to break was gone. In her place was someone he couldn't touch. At work, I spoke with quiet certainty, my words measured and sure. I didn't raise my voice or force my opinions. I just let the truth stand on its own, solid and unshakable. And I watched the way people leaned in to listen, the way their eyes flickered with quiet understanding. Because they saw it too, the shift, the power in the quiet, the strength in the calm. He saw it too. I could see it in the way he watched me now. His eyes always searching, always wary. He had told me once to watch my back, but he hadn't realized that I had been watching his all along. And now, in the quiet strength of my own resolve, he was starting to understand what that meant. Because I wasn't just done with his games. I was ready to turn them back on him. The air felt charged the morning I decided to act. It wasn't a grand decision, no sudden flash of anger, no triumphant cry of defiance. Just a quiet certainty as sure and steady as the dawn. I had spent enough nights lying awake listening to the echo of his voice in my head. I was done letting his words shape my world. It was time to take the first step in making him pay. I moved through the morning with deliberate calm, my routine a soft rhythm that settled my racing heart. I brewed my coffee, the scent rich and grounding. I chose my clothes with care, a dark blouse that felt like armor, a simple necklace that caught the light. I brushed my hair back from my face, my reflection calm and composed. There was no sign of the woman who had once wept for him. She was gone, replaced by someone he would never see coming. At work, he moved with his usual easy charm, laughter soft and smooth as silk. But I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes when they met mine. He thought I would be easy to break again, that the silence I had worn like a second skin was a sign of surrender. But he didn't understand that I had been gathering my strength in that quiet. And today, I was ready to show him just how deep it ran. The meeting room was filled with the soft murmur of voices, the rustle of papers, the gentle clink of coffee cups. He sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, his smile easy. But I saw the way his fingers drummed against the wood, the small, restless movements that betrayed the calm he wanted so badly to project. I took my seat, my expression neutral, and waited. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words were measured, my tone calm and sure. I laid out my ideas with quiet confidence, each one a quiet assertion of my worth. And as I spoke, I saw the shift in the room, the way people leaned in to listen, the way their eyes turned to me instead of him. He tried to interrupt, to brush aside my words, with a small dismissive laugh. But I didn't let him. I met his gaze calmly and continued each word, a quiet refusal to be silenced. It was a small thing, really. Just a few minutes of speaking the truth he had tried to bury. But in that moment, it felt like a revolution. Because I wasn't just reclaiming my voice. I was reclaiming the space he had tried to take from me. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway, his smile tight. "You're getting bold," he said softly, his voice low. I met his eyes without flinching. "I'm done being quiet," I said. And in that simple answer, I saw the flicker of uncertainty turn to something sharper fear. He tried to laugh it off, to brush away the weight of my words. But I saw the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his eyes darted away from mine. Because he knew in that moment that he no longer had the power he thought he did. And that terrified him. At home that night, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the darkness. I wrote in my journal the words slow and deliberate. Today I took the first blow. And it felt like freedom. I let the quiet settle around me, like a balm, the soft hush of the night, a reminder that I didn't need to shout to be heard. My voice was mine again, and it was enough. The next morning, he was careful around me. His words measured, his laughter a little too bright. He was trying to find his footing again, to see if the woman he had always known was still there. But she wasn't. And the more he looked, the more he realized that he had lost something he didn't even know. He valued my silence. At work, I kept moving forward. I spoke up more, my voice calm and sure. I offered ideas and watched them take shape, each small success, a quiet victory. And with every step, I felt the weight of his shadow grow a little lighter. He tried, of course, to find new ways to undermine me. Small jabs in meetings, quiet comments meant to chip away at my confidence. But I didn't let them in. I had learned that his words only had the power I gave them, and I wasn't giving him that power anymore. One afternoon, as I walked past his office, he called my name. I paused, turning to face him. "You're different these days," he said, his voice almost thoughtful. "I'm stronger these days," I said softly. And in that simple answer, I saw something break in his gaze. That night, I wrote in my journal the words, "A quiet anthem." He made me cry once. Now I make him wonder. And in that gentle declaration, I felt the first taste of victory settle into my bones, because this was just the beginning. He had thought my silence was surrender, but now he was learning that silence can be the sharpest blade of all. He had made me cry, and now I was making him pay. The game began the moment he realized I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. At first, he tried to pretend nothing had changed. He wore the same easy smile, the same calm voice. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the small tremor in his hands, when he thought no one was watching. He was used to being the one in control. Now he was scrambling to keep it. He started small, testing the boundaries of the new silence I wore like armor. A cutting comment here, a dismissive laugh there. He wanted to see if I would flinch, if I would step back into the role he had carved for me. But I didn't. I let his words wash over me, like water, refusing to let them find purchase in the woman I was becoming. At work, I moved with quiet purpose, each small victory, another crack in the foundation of the power he thought he held. My calm became its own kind of defiance, a gentle but unyielding refusal to be pulled back into his orbit. I watched the way people began to see me differently, their eyes meeting mine with something like respect. And I knew he saw it too. Knew it terrified him. He tried to find new ways to remind me of who he thought I was. He would stop by my desk, his voice low, and smooth, his words carefully chosen. "You're pushing too hard," he'd say softly, his smile gentle. "You don't want to make this difficult for yourself." But I didn't rise to the bait. I met his gaze steadily and said nothing. Because I understood now that silence can be louder than any shout. He didn't know how to fight that kind of quiet. He was used to anger, to tears, to voices raised in desperation. But I had given him all of that before, and he had turned it against me. So now I gave him nothing, no fear, no doubt. Just the calm certainty that he no longer had the power to hurt me. At home, I let the stillness of my own space fill me up. I wrote in my journal every night the words soft but steady. He is losing his hold on me. And with each line, I felt the truth of it settle deeper into my bones. He tried to tighten his grip in small, subtle ways. He would cut me off in meetings, redirect conversations, try to make me question the ground I stood on. But I had learned to see the smallness in his moves, the desperation in his eyes. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. I didn't give him anything at all. One afternoon, he pulled me aside in the hallway, his voice low and measured. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said, his eyes sharp. I met his gaze without blinking. "I'm just doing my job," I said calmly. And in that moment, I saw the first real crack in his composure. Because he knew deep down that was exactly what terrified him most. At night, I lay in bed and let the quiet be my companion. I thought about the woman I had been when he first told me I was nothing, about the way I had shrunk to fit the space he gave me. And I promised myself that I would never be that woman again. My tears had dried, but the lessons they taught me had rooted deep. I stopped waiting for him to see my worth. I stopped hoping he would change. Because I knew now that the only person I needed to see me was myself. And in that simple truth, I found a strength he could never touch. He tried to act like he didn't care, but I saw it in the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way his eyes narrowed when someone else listened to what I had to say. The way his smile didn't reach his eyes when he realized that my silence wasn't fear. It was freedom. Each day I felt the balance shift a little more. the power he thought he had over me, slipping through his fingers like water. And in that slow, steady unraveling, I found a quiet kind of satisfaction. Because I knew that this wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about taking back what he had tried to steal. My voice, my worth, my place in the world. At home, I wrote it in my journal, the words, "A quiet promise." He made me cry once. Now he will see the woman those tears made me become. And in that soft, certain line, I felt the calm resolve that had carried me this far settle deeper into my bones. The next morning, I woke early, the city still wrapped in the soft hush of dawn. I moved through my space with quiet certainty, each small action a reminder that I was no longer playing his game. I was building something else, something he could never take from me. At work, he watched me with wary eyes, his easy smile faltering at the edges. He didn't know how to fight the calm, didn't know how to break the quiet strength I wore like a second skin. And in that small, silent victory, I found the first real taste of freedom. Because he had made me cry. But now he was the one who had to wonder what came next. The day I decided to let the truth come to light felt like any other at first. The sky was a soft gray, the air cool against my skin as I walked to work. But beneath the calm rhythm of the city, there was a quiet electricity in the air, a sense that something was about to change. At the office, he moved through the halls with his usual practiced ease, his laughter soft and smooth, his eyes always searching. But I saw the tightness in his shoulders, the way he watched me with a quiet wariness he tried to hide. He knew something was coming, even if he didn't know what it was. I had spent weeks gathering my strength, watching and waiting. I had learned that the most dangerous truths are the ones spoken softly, in voices that refuse to be silenced. And now, I was ready to speak mine. The meeting room was full, the air thick with anticipation. He sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, his smile easy. But when his eyes met mine, there was no amusement there, only a quiet challenge. He still thought he could control the story, but he didn't know I had already taken it from him. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, my hands steady, my heart calm. I laid out the facts I had gathered, each one a quiet thread in the tapestry of truth he had tried so hard to keep hidden. My voice was measured, my tone even, but I saw the way the room shifted, the way people leaned in their eyes, wide and searching. He tried to interrupt, of course. A small laugh, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Let's not waste time with this," he said lightly, but his voice was too quick, too brittle. I met his gaze calmly and kept speaking, because I knew now that the power of the truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to stand. The more I spoke, the more I saw the cracks in his mask. The way his smile faltered, the way his fingers drummed restlessly on the table. He had built his world on the belief that no one would ever question him, that the silence of those around him was his shield. But my voice cut through that silence like a blade. When I finished, the room was quiet, the weight of my words settling like a stone in the still air. And in that quiet, I saw the truth reflected in every pair of eyes that met mine. They saw him now. The man behind the charm, the lies beneath the laughter. And he saw it too. He tried to laugh it off, to brush away the truth, with a soft smile and a quick word. But the room didn't laugh with him this time. And in that small quiet shift, I felt the last of his hold on me slip away. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway, his eyes dark, his voice low. "What are you trying to do?" he asked, his words soft but sharp. I met his gaze steadily, my own voice calm. "I'm done hiding," I said. And in that simple answer, I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. At home that night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights soft and flickering in the darkness. I wrote in my journal the words slow and deliberate. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be seen. And in that simple line, I felt the quiet power of my own voice settle into me like a promise. He had spent so long trying to convince me that my worth was something he could decide, that my silence was proof of his power. But in the gentle calm of that night, I knew that he had been wrong. My silence had been my choice. My voice was my weapon, and I was done letting him decide when I could use it. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head held high, my steps steady and sure. He watched me from across the room, his eyes wary, his smile tight. He still thought he could find a way to undo what I had done. But I knew better. Because the truth once spoken can't be taken back. People started to come to me quietly, their voices low but full of quiet strength. "Thank you," they said one by one, for saying what needed to be said. And in each small word, I felt the gentle weight of what I had done settle into me like a soft, steady heartbeat. He avoided me after that, his laughter louder than before, his smile sharper. But I saw the cracks in the facade he had worked so hard to build. I saw the small, quiet fear in the way he looked at me now, not as someone to be silenced, but as someone he could no longer control. At home, I wrote it down in my journal, the words, "a quiet anthem." He made me cry once. Now he will remember that I am not afraid of him anymore, because he had spent so long believing that he could decide the shape of my world, that he could keep the truth hidden in the dark. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. And once it's spoken, it echoes in ways no one can predict. He had made me cry, but now he was the one who had to face the quiet power of my voice. And this was just the beginning. The days after the truth came out felt different. The air in the office seemed to hum with a new energy, quieter, but somehow more real. People still spoke in the same soft tones, still smiled the same careful smiles. But there was a weight in the way they looked at me now, a quiet understanding that hadn't been there before. He moved through the halls with a practiced ease, his laughter just as smooth, his smile just as bright. But I saw it now, the small, careful pauses when he thought no one was watching. The way his eyes flickered over to me, searching for something he couldn't name. He still wanted to believe he was in control, that the story he had crafted could be patched back together. But the cracks were too wide now. The truth was out, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't take it back. I didn't flaunt my victory. I didn't need to. The power of the truth was enough. It moved through the room like a quiet current, shifting the way people spoke, the way they carried themselves. It was in the small glances I caught across the table, the slight respectful nods when I spoke. My voice, once dismissed, now carried a weight he could no longer deny. One afternoon, he stopped me in the hallway. His eyes were calm, but his voice was soft, almost hesitant. "You've changed," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You're different." I met his gaze, my own calm and unshaken. "I'm not different," I said softly. "I've just stopped letting you decide who I am." For a moment, his mask slipped. I saw the flash of something vulnerable in his eyes, an understanding he couldn't quite name. And then it was gone, replaced by that same easy smile. But I knew he had heard me, and more importantly, he believed it. At home, I sat by the window, with a cup of tea, the city lights shimmering in the darkness. I thought about all the times I had given him the power to shape my world. All the times I had let his words define me. And I realized that those days were done. He could still try to pretend nothing had changed, but I no longer needed his acknowledgement to know my own strength. I wrote it in my journal, the words soft, but certain. I don't need him to see me. I see myself. The next morning, I woke with that quiet certainty, still warm in my chest. I moved through the world with a calm that felt unshakable, each step a gentle declaration of the woman I had become. He watched me carefully, his laughter a little too bright, his words a little too quick, because he now knew, that he could no longer bend me to his will. I didn't seek out the conversations, but they came to me all the same. Small, quiet words from people who had once looked past me. "I always thought you were stronger than he gave you credit," for one colleague said, her voice soft but sure. "I'm glad you showed him." I smiled and thanked her, my own voice calm and steady, because I understood now that this wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about living in the quiet certainty of my own worth. He still tried, of course. Old habits die hard. A small comment here, a careful slight there, each one a desperate attempt to reclaim the control he had lost. But I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. I met each one with a calm smile, a steady voice, and the quiet knowledge that he could no longer touch me. At night, I lay in bed and let the quiet wrap around me like a balm. I thought about the woman I had been when he first made me cry small and scared, so desperate to be seen. And I thought about the woman I had become, calm and steady, no longer waiting for someone else to tell her she mattered. And in that soft reflection, I felt a peace I had never known before. He had made me cry, but he had also made me see that my worth was never his to decide, see that the quiet strength I carried was mine alone, and see that the woman I was becoming was someone he could never break. The next day, he stopped me again. This time his voice was softer, his smile smaller. I didn't realize, he said quietly, his eyes searching mine. I didn't see what you could become. I met his gaze calmly, my voice gentle but sure. You didn't need to, I said. I always knew. For a moment, he looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. And in that silence, I saw the final quiet acknowledgement of my strength in his eyes. At home that night, I wrote it in my journal, the words, a quiet promise. He made me cry once, but now he sees me, and that is enough. Because I had spent too long waiting for his validation, too long waiting for him to see me as more than the quiet shadow he had tried to shape me into. But I understood now that I didn't need his permission to be whole. My worth was mine to claim, and I had already done it. He had made me cry. But I had turned those tears into something he could never take away. My strength, my resolve, my voice. And this was just the beginning. The last day of this chapter in my life arrived without fanfare. The sky was clear, the air sharp with the first touch of autumn. I woke early, the quiet of the morning wrapping around me like a soft cloak. There was no heaviness in my chest, no anxious flutter in my stomach. Just a calm certainty that had taken root in the quiet spaces of my heart. I moved through my morning with deliberate care, each small ritual a gentle affirmation of how far I had come. I brewed my tea, the steam rising in soft curls, and watched the light shift across the walls. I chose my clothes with intention, a soft sweater, a pair of dark jeans that made me feel steady, grounded. In the mirror, I saw a woman who had learned to hold her own gaze without flinching. A woman who had turned her quiet into her strength. At work, the day unfolded in its usual rhythm, phones ringing, voices murmuring in hushed conversations. He was there, of course, moving through the office with the same careful composure he had always worn. But I saw it now, the small tremor in his voice when he spoke to me, the way his eyes shifted when our gazes met. He knew in the quiet of his own mind that he had lost something he could never reclaim. He tried one last time to find his footing. In a meeting that afternoon, he made a comment, soft, carefully crafted, meant to remind me of who he thought I had been. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But I didn't flinch. I met his gaze calmly, my voice steady as I spoke. I think we're done with those kinds of words, I said softly. And in that simple sentence, I felt the final thread between us snap. There was no dramatic ending, no raised voices or slammed doors. Just a quiet shift in the air, a gentle exhale that carried with it the last remnants of the power he had once held over me. He didn't argue. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, and in that silent moment, I saw the truth settle in his eyes. He had made me cry, but he could never make me small again. At home that night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights soft and golden in the distance. I let the quiet settle around me, each breath a gentle reminder of the calm that had become my own. I thought about everything that had brought me here, the tears, the doubt, the quiet strength I had found in the spaces he had tried to make me fear. I opened my journal, the pages worn and familiar beneath my fingers. I wrote it down, the words, a quiet promise to myself. He thought my tears were weakness, but they were the beginning of my power. And as I set down my pen, I felt the final weight of his voice slip from my shoulders. Because I understood now that the power he had once held over me was an illusion. My worth had never been his to define. My voice had never belonged to him. And the quiet I had carried for so long was never emptiness. It was a space I had claimed for myself, a space that no one else could ever fill. The next morning, I woke to a world that felt new, the air crisp with the promise of change. I moved through the day with the calm certainty of someone who had learned to trust her own strength. At work, people spoke to me with quiet respect, their words gentle but sure. And when he looked at me, his eyes wary and uncertain, I felt no fear, because I knew in the deepest part of my heart that I had already won. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his validation. What I needed, what I had always needed, was my own quiet voice, the soft, steady heartbeat of my own worth. And I had found it. He had made me cry, but I had turned those tears into something he could never take away. My strength, my resolve, my quiet power. And now, as I stood on the threshold of something new, I carried that power with me like a gentle flame. Because this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of something bigger than either of us could have imagined. If you're listening to this now, if you've ever felt the weight of someone else's words pressing down on your shoulders, I want you to remember this. You don't have to let their doubts define you. You don't have to let their voice drown out your own. Your worth is not something they can give or take away. It is yours. Quiet, unshakable, and waiting to be claimed. So take a breath, take a step, and remember you are more than their shadows. You are more than their doubts. You are more than the tears they tried to turn into chains. Because he made me cry, but I made him pay. She